In the beginning, God. And then when you go all the way to the New Testament, to the book of John, chapter 1, and we're all very familiar with that. It's a wonderful passage. John is a wonderful, wonderful gospel to study. And the book of John, chapter 1, verse 1, we hear, in the beginning. And instead of saying, in the beginning God, it says, in the beginning was the Word. Now let's just read it. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So Genesis 1, John 4 is all the same. He was in the beginning with God, and all things were made through Him, and without Him nothing was made that was made. In Him was life, and the life was the light of men, and the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. And let's go to verse 14. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, as we beheld His glory, the glory of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. And John bore witness of Him, and cried out, saying, This was He of whom I said, He who comes after me is preferred before me, for He was before me. So, I'm speaking to some Christians here tonight that understand the Bible, that know the interpretation, that understands this passage well. But I'd like to bring just a little bit of insight and maybe share a little thought, because for quite some time it's not about how well can I interpret the Word of God. Of course, we always want to be right, and I think I am right in thinking the Word and Jesus is the same. It wasn't, in the beginning was a God, it was God, and He always was. Jesus didn't have His beginning here in John. We find Him all the way back in Genesis and even beyond. He didn't have a starting point, and He will never have an ending point. He always has been. Now, the earthly, fleshly man began. It began in the New Covenant, in the New Testament, where God now comes to earth, and for the first time in the history of the world, God is going to become man. Now, I'm reminded of the Philippians, one of the Pauline epistles, in Philippians chapter 2, and somewhere around verse 7, maybe verse 17, the author there, Paul, says, and He emptied Himself. When we read in John chapter 1, in the beginning was God, there it's representing Him in all of His deity, and all of His glory, and all of His splendor and majesty. And then when you get to verse number 14, and the Word became flesh, then what Paul says in Philippians, He emptied Himself. He didn't empty Himself of His humility or of His love, not even of being God, but He emptied Himself of all the pleasures of heaven. He emptied Himself of being worshipped and being served to come and serve. I mean, He done a whole lot of things for you and I. And somewhere, somehow, that's going to have to get exciting again. We read that, and honestly, I can read it, and sometimes if I'm not careful, I'll fall asleep reading the Bible. And how sad that is, even though the human frailty, but boy, I'll tell you what, there are some books that I can pick up and read, and I'm trying to think of one of them, and that book was about this thick, and I had the opportunity that day to do nothing, and I knocked that book out that day. Man, it was such an exciting book, and it wasn't a worldly book. It was about Christ and things, but it wasn't the Bible. But the point I want to make is somewhere these things are going to have to become exciting to us again. And at some point in time, they're going to. Or there's going to be a group that it's going to. And not that if it doesn't ever get that exciting for us, doesn't mean we're not going to heaven. But man, we're going to miss out on the things that God is wanting to do through the church today. Because Paul tells us, I believe in Romans chapter 11, I bring this up quite often, that at some point in time that we're going to have to provoke the Jews to jealousy. They're going to be jealous over what we have. Now, right now, no one's jealous over what I have. I told Dorothy, I said, we're just like Jesus. We don't even have a place to lay our head to sleep at night time. And Irv and them time to go on vacation so we can ramshack their home while they're gone. But something is going to have to change in us. And I will tell you, it's kind of weird and ironic, but it's such a wonderful thing. God can take a small little thing, and if we're out there searching and studying and looking and reading, we'll find that thing that He'll get us excited about. And right now, the thing that I'm excited about is Lord, what can I do to help my Jewish brothers and sisters? And I'm careful saying it that way, because I know they're not my brothers and sisters in God, but I hope for one day that they will be. So, I mean, I'm careful about the way I said that, because, you know, a lot of people say it, and I realize that most of your Orthodox Jews hate Christians. I can show you a rabbi after rabbi that made the conversion to Christianity, and now they're disowned by their family. So, I remember, and I've shared this with this church, and I remember the first time the Lord began to show me as I was studying Hebrew, and I was really looking at the Hebrew language, and being a numbers kind of guy, I really loved what the alphabet, the numbers their alphabet stood for, and there's 22 letters in the alphabet, and the first letter is Aleph, A-L-E-F, and the last letter is Tav, T-A-V. Not only its numeric value, and it really it really was an amazing, especially when you're studying the sun and the moon and stars, and you look at these numbers, and see, if you're not careful, you'll base your doctrines and your beliefs on a language, and you can't do that. I have so many people say, if we could just speak Hebrew. No. Because we can't ever, and I don't know, maybe the Lord's preparing us to be able to partner up with some people that's in Israel, and I hope so, because I'm making some connections there. And so I'm trying to get myself at least a little bit educated, but at the same time, I don't want to fall into the trap that they've fallen into, that they know so much about their language and even the Old Testament that they don't even see Jesus. See, or we completely missed the point. But I remember looking at that. But it not only has a numeric value, but it has a pictorial a picture to it. And I remember in the Greek in the New Testament when it would say Alpha and Omega, and we know Alpha and Omega in the Greek alphabet. Alpha is the first letter. Omega would be the last letter. And that means Jesus is the first and the last, the beginning and the end. And in the Hebrew, he's the Aleph Tav. So, and when John would have said this, or Jesus would have said this in the book of Revelation, he wouldn't have said it in Greek. He would have said it in Hebrew. He would have said, I am the Aleph Tav. And I haven't let my mind explore so far that I got to thinking, you know, that Roman soldier, when Jesus was on the cross, you remember the astounding statement he made? Surely this was the Son of God. And I began to think, why would he make that statement? And I understand the significance of what happened to Jesus and how it was prophesied in the book of Psalms. But I also know that here these Roman soldiers, and most of them probably lived in Jerusalem. They lived there, they abode there, they stayed there. And whether they spoke the language or not, they probably learned it as a second or third language, because that's where they was That's where they were living. And they heard the stories, and they were probably around a lot of the Jewish rabbis, and they heard the teachings, because the Sanhedrin would be, they might be speaking, especially questioning Jesus out in the multitude of the people. And so, they would have to hear a lot of this that was going on, and I could see what in this language the Lord was showing me. In the Aleph, we see the head of a ox. And that word is not only ox, but it means strength. And it means leader. The first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. I am the beginning and the end. And Jesus says the word logos, the word that the word, that Jesus was the Word. So I'm putting the language together. So I'm sealing this Aleph. And it's a picture of an ox, a strong man. Strength. And then I look at the very last letter of the alphabet. Not necessarily this time the numeric value, but the pictorial picture of it. And it means a mark or a covenant. And just so happens that mark is a cross. So what Jesus was saying, when I'm the Aleph and the Tav, He said, I am the strong man on the cross. And you can see that in their language. And sometimes I'm thinking, I wonder if that Roman soldier, if he, because Jesus had the inscription, and all this was going through his mind, and all of a sudden he seen the strong man on the cross. Jesus on the cross. And somehow or another, if we can even show the Jewish people, to show them Jesus is the true Messiah. It would be astounding. It would be definitely another prophecy fulfilled as God's people are now coming back to Him. What a wonderful thing that would be, and to see and to be a part of all of this happening, and to show them how Jesus came down and He emptied Himself of everything that He was and everything that He is, all the splendor of glory, and He came first to bring salvation to the Jew and then the Gentile. And that you and I today, we have been commissioned to help bring this to being. But the church is far, far, far from being able to do that. We actually, in my opinion, I think it would be good if every one of us would just ask the Lord to completely tear this house apart. To destroy this house. And take it and make sure the foundation's not cracked. Man, I watch Forged in Fire. Man, I love that show. And then I think, man, I'd love to be able to do it. And then I think, there's no way I could swing that hammer for 4 and 5 hours. Just boom, boom. And they're forging that metal. But you know what they have to do? They have to take that metal and they put it in the forge. And they have to know the precise temperature to get it to. And then they have to quench it in oil. Oh boy, I just make so many comparisons when I'm watching this stuff. And they have to quench it in oil. And the first thing they do when they pull it out of the oil, they look and see if it's straight. Because if it's not straight, they've got just a fraction of a minute to try to get that blade straight. Because if they don't, they could break it trying to straighten it. And if it's straight, then the next thing they do, they take a file. And they run that file down the edge. And if it drags across the edge, then it's not been forged properly, so it has to go back into the fire. But when it's right, it's straight. They run that file down it. It's a smooth across the edge. They clean it up, sharpen it, and man, they put that thing through the test. They are whacking at they'll take a metal helmet and whack that helmet 10 times with that knife. They'll take it and stab it inside of a steel or aluminum can or a metal can, and then they still test the consistency of how sharp, and a lot of those things will cut like butter. And it all starts with, did they get the forge right? Because the ones that break, they'll let you see it breaks, and you can see the grain inside the steel. Or you can see a little crack on the spine, and that's where the weak spot, and it breaks. And I'm asking the Lord, I need you to destroy this house. Because my foundation, I need to take another look at my foundation. And symbolically I'm speaking. And I don't want God to crush me physically. But spiritually, and to do that, and then to show me the impurities in my foundation, because I'm telling you guys, they're there. They are there. And then once we get this, and what we do, it's not that you take this out and add something in. No, you take this out and add nothing back in, because it's Jesus plus nothing is the sure foundation. And then we're ready. Now we are ready. We are ready for any battle. It doesn't matter what our kids are going to do. It does not matter. It does not matter what our employer is going to do. It's not going to matter, because we've got a foundation, and our foundation has already taught us how to trust God totally. And I am telling you, when you can do this, when a Christian, because let me tell you in my observation, and I could be wrong. In my observation, one of the greatest differences between Christianity and Judaism is, in Judaism, they are bound and determined to get the interpretation right, but they have no spiritual context at all. And Christianity, it's all about the spiritual, and we don't even get the context right. Listen, my mama shouted in her car to the song of Proud Mary. Now, I think that's a wonderful thing. But Proud Mary was toting she's smoking marijuana. And my mom, because she's seen CCR, Clear Credence Revival, she thought it's Christian, so she just worshiping to that whole CD. I said, Mom, what are you doing with this CD in here? We can spiritualize anything. And you know what? I don't know that that's a bad thing. But we're missing this other part. Man, we've got so much that we can show our Jewish friends. So much, and we may have the opportunity like no other. In 2006, I would say Stephen might know it, and he probably will only know bits and pieces, but for the most of us, we've probably never heard this. In 2006, there was a Jewish rabbi, Orthodox Jew, that died. He died at the age of 108 years old. And this rabbi, his last name was Rabbi Kurik. And he was very renowned. He wasn't some kind of obscure rabbi. This guy was known by all. And Judaism is a little bit like Christianity, where Christianity has denominations. Judaism don't have denominations, but they kind of have different veins of how they believe and what they believe. Some really follow the Talmud. And if you don't know what the Talmud is, that's not the written law, but the oral law that was basically wrote down on paper probably around 700 AD, somewhere in that area of time. And in the oral law, they instead of the 10 Commandments, they have what they know as the 7 Noahide laws. So you find a lot of these different areas, and Rabbi Kirik was very well versed in the Talmud. He was so well known, so well liked, so well revered. When he died, they had to shut the streets down in Jerusalem, as he had over 300,000 people attended his funeral. And what they didn't know, he had a few students that I guess he still maybe tried to do a little bit of teaching, that didn't catch all of them off guard, but what this rabbi did, he left a letter, and in this letter he told them, he said, you cannot open this letter until I've been dead for 1 year. And after a year, now you have to understand the way some of them, a lot of them writes in code. You know, so they have to decipher. But the people that know him, it's a little easier for them to decipher from their master, their rabbi. So in this letter that was written a year later, now this was such big news, Israeli news, all these people in Jerusalem, they were there ready a year later for the unveiling of this letter. And this letter revealed who the true Messiah was. And it revealed Jesus. Now, you remember what I told you about the Jewish, the Orthodox Jews, the rabbis? Many of them are not friendly toward Christianity. Now, this guy was so revered, but immediately upon reading that, then they began to question, he must have been out of his mind. Something must have been wrong with him. Oh, I would say the Christians are dancing in the streets because Rabbi Kirik is a Christian. No, they stifled that. They took it off the websites, but somehow or another it got itself back on there. And now here we are some 13 years later, 12 years later from the time they read it. And this is picking up speed again. And some of the Messianic Jewish rabbis that I've had fortunate enough to speak to are talking about Jewish people that are coming to know Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior simply because of that hidden message of who the true Messiah was. And his name was Yeshua, or Yeshua. God is getting his chosen people ready. They are longing for him. And he's speaking. I mean, Rabbi Kirik even made the comment that he met the Messiah. That he came to him in a vision. See, God's miraculously, and the church needs to be, we need to start being the church. We need to get excited about this thing called Christianity. I don't know. I don't know how it should look, what we should do. I'm not a big fan in saying, well, we can't do this and we can't do that. And you know, if we're not careful, we'll cross over and we're liable to be like the legalistic people, to where you can't even breathe without it being you're breathing the wrong way. We can't go that direction, but it's got to be different than it is today. And I think it's because we've just fallen out of love with Christ. Listen, I've said it, and how many of you said it, that oh my goodness, surely I'm not going to have to read the book of Leviticus. Oh my Lord. Well, you know what? The Lord took me down a path on that word begat. And boy, I'm going to tell you, that helped me even in the book of Leviticus. It helped me in a lot of books because it's amazing what God will do when you get excited about the things of God. I mean, I was so bound and determined I was going to be excited about reading Leviticus. I went and spent $30 on a DVDs that have about 700 actors that are acting out the Bible throughout these DVDs, and to make it at least not sound so monotone. They've done a pretty good job at it too. Something needs to change, and I really believe the Lord wants to use us. I honestly, I know God wants to use all of His people. I think He has a job for the people in this church. If we'll just answer, step up, and take it. But I'm going to tell you something. It's not going to come without a price. It's not. It's going to cost you. It's not going to be easy. Some things you'll have to give up. I'll tell you what, my wife and I, probably in the last 20 years, I would say we've been on maybe 2 vacations. And I'll be honest with you, I can't say that I've missed that at all. Sometimes we think, I'm just saying, it costs me that. It's going to cost you something. It may change the way you plan on living the rest of your life. It may change the job that you do. But it's going to change you it's going to change something in your life that's not going to bring more pleasure to you, but it's going to bring more pleasure and glory to Him. And if we will just accept that and not worry that we're afraid we're going to miss something. Because I promise you. Let me share with you what we're missing. And I brought this up in prayer. And it's just evidence again, the church is so distant from where we need to be. That not even makes the headlines in our news. First of all, let me say this. In October 1962, I believe it's either 10 or 13 days that we know today as the Cuban crisis. And that was a huge standoff. And if I would have only been just a few months old, so obviously I don't remember it. But from reading and hearing other people talk, they really thought that we were going to go into war. And it was going to be terrible. And even though I know that there was an internet and YouTube and Facebook and all the social media, and the only way of getting the news out would be through the regular channels, through TV, radio, newspaper. But I'm quite confident most of the news in that period of 10 or 13 days, however long that little ordeal was going on, that at some point in time, most of the Christian people in America began to hear about what was going on and what was happening. And I can promise you, the church was praying. I just can't imagine the church not praying. I grew up in a time that if things were going on, the church prayed. We prayed. We called out for God. Not necessarily, I mean, we were needing to know what we needed to do. So, with that in mind, I read an article today that the Pope, the present Pope today, is calling for a world leader or to ignite a world leader to ignite global rule and save the planet. These things are bound to happen. Speaking of the Cuban crisis, most of us today are probably aware, but we don't realize the significance that we've got something happening right now that's equivalent to the Cuban crisis. And that's Russia is in Venezuela. And they just brought in their bombers that have the capability of delivering nuclear weapons, and that cruise at speeds twice the speed of sound. And they're in Venezuela. If you're not familiar with Venezuela, it's just a hop and a skip when you're running those speeds out of Florida. And the church is not praying. I guess it was this week that we listened to Bolton, and in regards to Iran, and so they moved the USS Abe Lincoln and her supporting ships, along with some B-2 bombers, into the region over there to show support. Now, guys, I'm going to tell you something. If you're an historian, this has a lot to do with oil. We know that President Trump stopped any exports. He says no more exports of oil to come out of China. Out of Iran. Of course, China is not heeding to the call. And Iran has threatened to block the Hormuz Channel, which where about 40% of all the world oil travels through. And now you've got America flexing its muscles. I'm going to tell you, read a little bit of history before we went to World War II with Japan. Find out some of the similarities going on now that was going on then. If God does not intervene, we're going to war with Iran. But I want you to know something. This is a proxy war. These are proxy wars. This with North Korea, Iran, Syria. This is all proxy war between America, China, and Russia. And the church is not praying. I'm not going to spend any time on that, but I am going to read this one thing because it amused me to read it. I wished I'd wrote it down verbatim, but he didn't. It wasn't written. He just made the statement. And this reporter stated, China and Russia are moving their chess pieces while America is at home arguing issues. Kind of reminds you of our enemies playing chess and we're playing checkers. See, this is happening and we're not praying, and we've got our fingers crossed hoping that this will go away. It may go away if we can pray. And we need to ask God to give us the wisdom. We need to know how to pray. We need to know what to pray. At the end of the day, we need to know that we're praying according to His will. That's the next area I'm going to start driving home, because even the best of us, we are praying for things and we don't realize we are telling God how we and what we want. I try to always think of the worst case scenarios that would really drive my point home. And today I was thinking about what thing is it that I've been standing for wanting to do that I can drive this point home, and it was the heartbeat bill, the fetal heartbeat bill. In my mind, that'd be a great bill to pass. But I never once considered if this was what God wanted done. Because I was determined this would be what's best. And the reason I use that, because that wouldn't stop all abortions. It would only stop probably about 80% of the abortions. And even though I still believe it'd been a good bill, and I still believe that's something that the Lord would be okay with, but I did not even ask God what His will was in that. I was telling God what I thought the best action would be. And I hope you're catching this. We need to start really thinking about everything that we're doing. We don't realize here we've got the Creator of the universe, and we're not even allowing Him to do what He really wants to do in our life, because we've already told Him how He's got to do it and what He must do and how He must do it. The best of us, I have started listening to my words that I pray, and I catch myself every time saying, Lord, here again I've told you what's best. And it sounded great. And honestly, it's probably something the Lord would put His stamp of approval behind. But that's not the point. If I'm doing it in that prayer, I'm doing it in all my prayers. See, Jesus came and He emptied Himself to redeem us back to the Father, to let us to have a life, a victorious life, but that life is conditioned behind Him. It's conditioned with Him leading the way in every aspect. It's conditioned with, it's all about Him and nothing about me. And that whatever He wants, He gets, regardless. I don't know about you, but I love these moments in my life where the Lord is really challenging me. You think you know what I want? Think again. I dare you to move yourself out of the way, and let's see what we can get done. I love it when the Lord starts showing me this stuff. That starts burning a passion and a fire within me. And I believe it will you also. And that's what we need. We need that passion and fire. And I will tell you all that, because what will happen, it'll be all about Jesus. It will not even be about witnessing to souls of men. It'll be about witnessing to Jesus, lifting Him up, Him drawing the souls of men. And we're just walking in unison with God, and it will do nothing but bring jealousy to the Jewish people. That they'll want this Messiah that they figure is theirs in the first place. That the God we serve is really their God. Let's bow our heads. Father, we love you.